Let's go. I love doing videos like this because it's really so impossible for me to make a video like this because, by the way, if it sounds like a commercial. If you're someone that has just subscribed to me, when I make really strong declarations about cameras or lenses, I actually take that deathly seriously. Because if I didn't, people would not only rip my face off, but what also would happen is that I would hear from somebody that bought something, and it actually really disturbs me. Not in that kind of disturbed way, but it disturbs me that anybody would spend money and be unhappy because some of the things that have pissed me off most, and I don't know what pissed me off, but just like disappointed me, like when someone recommended something and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. It was just, a really bad buy, and I don't do that to other people. So this is a must-own lens. Watch them all vanish off of eBay. Another thing too, and this is kind of like a secret of eBay, is the Japanese know a lot. Not only do they keep their lenses a lot cleaner than Americans do, especially. They know what the hell a good lens is a lot better than Americans do. But you know that old stereotype about Japanese are always walking around with a camera in their hands. That's not meant to be. It just they're a lot more in touch with cameras and lenses. One of the interesting things about eBay is that if you find a really awesome lens that Americans generally don't know about, you'll see that the people that are selling it inside the United States will have a really low price on it, generally speaking, but in Japan the price will be a lot higher. Now, it is the case that Japan, especially since these are made in Japan, has a lot more of these Nikkor lenses per square mile for sure than Americans do, than the United States or Canada and certainly Australia. That a lot of Nikkor lenses will be really cheap and in much better condition from Japan. So I'll say just, like the 60mm 2.8D Nikkor, that micro Nikkor, which is a Swiss Army knife lens. There's just a ton of them in Japan and they're so cheap. But on an unknown lens to Americans, and this is one of those, it's listed really cheap in the United States, but it's listed kind of expensive in Japan. Actually, the average Japanese price is about $600+. Well, actually about $700+ on this lens, 600, 700. But I've seen a lot of these sell for $300 out of the United States and even Canada, like Henry's up in Canada on eBay. I got a couple of these lenses. This is, by the way, someone's like saying, shut the hell up and get to the point. This is the PC-Nikkor Perspective Control Nikkor 28mm f3.5. It is absolutely perfect on a Nikon, and it is absolutely perfect on a Fujifilm. I mean, absolutely perfect. And let me start off by stating the obvious fact that I've always said that resolution or sharpness is not always everything, and that's true, but it actually is really important for like macro photography and technical lenses like this, which are made for architecture, indoors, and perspective control for landscape. Even though this lens is old, and by the way, interestingly enough, the AIS Nikkor, the regular non-perspective control Nikkor 28mm f3.5, is a horrible lens. It's not that sharp. A lot of chromatic aberration. But this is also a 28mm 3.5. By the way, it has a much more significantly larger, I kind of said that wrong, significantly larger front and secondary and third group elements to cover the fact that this lens is meant to be shifted. Now, this is not a tilt shift lens. Everybody thinks you could just call these tilt shift lenses, and of course there are tilt shift lenses, but this lens shifts only. But it has 360 degrees shift, so this lens does not tilt at all, it only shifts. So this is the reason why too that these are called perspective control or PC lenses. A lot of people don't know or realize why it is they should own this lens. Let me get to that in a second. This lens, even though it is an old lens, I think the AIS version was made up until like, what, 1980 on this? Or even a little further than that? Because this is the AIS version. You can actually tell because it actually has a black adjustment knob. The older ones avoid, they have a silver adjustment knob. This lens is so insanely sharp, it'll just cut you looking at it the wrong way. Just absolutely just unbelievable. And for a lens wider, even 35 millimeters back in the 70s and 80s, Nikkors in general, but not specific to anybody. They weren't that sharp, but this is a technical lens, so it's not only designed to be sharp, this lens is just excruciatingly bleeping sharp to the point of amazement, considering the fact that it's a rather old lens. It is, of course, Japanese made. I know you, and I've made a video about this recently, and of course there's quite a few perspective control videos out there actually discussing the uses for PC. I forget that this lens has 3 dots on it. You got to forget and use the rear dot as opposed to the rotation knob for turning the lens, and of course it has 11 millimeters of shift. Like if you're going to do landscape photography, you can drag it way over here. Now you're thinking 28 millimeters is not that wide for landscape. One of the most important things, and of course it has multiple uses, specifically for panoramas, also for interiors. Like when you're doing a shot of, say, a church, and I know I don't have the lens on the front of this camera, which you shouldn't hold any camera like that with the sensor exposed. You know, you're doing this number. And then, of course, the top of the buildings converge. And you see a lot of stuff in magazines, and it's like, why don't my images look that way? I took that same shot. It's because you did this number. You took the plane of your camera out of plane of the building. Obviously architectural, unless it's like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, is like this. And when you take your camera and you want to capture the top of that building, what happens is you end up with converging lines. And you can correct for that in Photoshop. However, the serious problem with that is to get that correction in Photoshop, it will basically throw away, depending on the shot, about 40% of your megapixels. It actually has to toss away a significant amount of the image to make everything perfectly sharp. So one of the great things of using these, well, many great reasons why, of having a perspective control lens, is that you're not tossing away any megapixels. You just edit the image as you would any other image. There's really only one trick to using a perspective control lens, and technical lenses like this frighten people, but they shouldn't. Like I said, this is not a, if it were a tilt lens, there is a good bit of technicality in there as far as training and what you should or shouldn't do. But let me actually bring this back over here. Let me bring it to vertical. Instead of, let's say this is a building here, if I were actually to be shooting this building, I want to shoot the top of it, I don't actually bring my focal plane out of parallel with the building, which you would have to do to capture the top of it. I keep it here, and of course this is a tripod lens. However, if you actually have decent shutter speeds and decent ISO, you can just pop a bubble level, I'll get it out straight in a second, on the top of your camera and stick this on a monopod. Okay, and you see what I'm doing here? As I'm raising up the front section. Actually, this isn't the entire lens. The rear part is just rotation and mount only on this particular perspective control lens. I'm actually able to capture the entire top of the building, let's assume it was up here, without bringing my focal plane, my sensor plane in this case, out of parallel with whatever it is that I'm shooting. This goes for trees. As soon as you go out to the forest, you tilt your camera up and, oh crap, now all the trees are leaning up to a point. It's like, well, it's a beautiful picture, but it doesn't look as cool as like that professional guy's pictures where all the trees are parallel and sticking straight up. Same thing with the buildings. Like, oh my god, here's a beautiful shot, 2 or 3 buildings. You tilt your camera up, now all the buildings are coming to a converging point. It might be a most incredibly beautiful shot, but it'll look a whole lot better if the vertical lines were parallel to each other. This is an incredibly important lens to have. Nobody really knows about this lens. You have to stop down. There's a little trick actually to stopping down. It's no big deal. It's the same way a lot of the old Zeiss Jennas work, where you actually set the f-stop that you're going to be shooting at. Set that. You could open up the meter and then close down. On a mirrorless camera, it doesn't make any difference. You just stop down to whatever the hell you want. Like I said, basically this is a tripod lens, but you can use it if you have any sort of decent lighting using a bubble level, so that before you take the shot, it's like, okay, I'm level, i.e. parallel to whatever the hell it is I'm shooting. And then you actually raise as you look in your... This is one of the wonders of having a perspective control lens on a mirrorless camera. Raise raise my lens group up, basically the entire lens. You can see I'm up all the way here at 11 millimeters. However far you need to go. Level it out, compose as you want, keep it level, take the shot. How difficult is that? If, however, you want to do panorama, the same issue happens with panoramas. When you do a panorama, you're actually taking your sensor plane out of parallel with whatever it is you're shooting. On this, you set it on a tripod. In this case, the monopod would not be advisable. Here, I'm going to actually rotate the entire front of the lens perpendicular to where it is I want to take a shot. Bring it over 5 millimeters, take a shot. Bring it over another 5 or 6 millimeters to max, take a shot. Okay, then I'm going to bring it back to 0. And then I'm going to take my entire section, take it 180 degrees the other direction, assuming I have this on a tripod. Take it over 5 millimeters, take a shot. Take it all the way max, take a shot. My sensor plane never fell out of parallel with the panorama that I'm actually taking. Now you're thinking 28 millimeters is not that wide, especially on a crop sensor camera, in which case you're looking at 42 millimeters of equivalent. But after you've combined these shots, stitched them together in Photoshop or whatever editing software you want, the results are far superior. And also too, you don't have any issues with converging lines. You've kept your image plane parallel to whatever it is you're shooting. And this could be buildings or trees. This lens, like I said, is absolutely razor sharp. A lot of them have recently gone for $300. And that's one of the wonderful things about technical lenses. Technical lenses, even though this is an old lens, were designed to be insanely sharp. Really, 90% of what you would be using this lens for, like I said, you could just use it as a regular frigging lens. In this case, a 42 millimeter equivalent. Now, f3.5 is not that fast, you're thinking. Well, this is a perspective control lens. This is made for interiors, for outdoor buildings, landscapes. You're stopping the hell down anyway. I mean, really, in most situations like that, since you're doing tripod shooting, unless you want to do a monopod shot and have a sufficient shutter speed, you're stopping the hell down to f5.6 minimum, usually f8 or even f16. So the fact that this is only an f3.5 lens, it means absolutely nothing. If this were an f5.6 lens, which of course it does not, it would still be completely irrelevant for what this technical lens is designed for. Now, nobody really ever asks me questions about perspective control lenses, and they should. Think of all the shots that you've done of a beautiful landscape, a building, whatnot, where everything looks like it is converging to a point and falling over. Like I said, correcting that in Photoshop is going to throw away about 40% of your megapixels. That's not good. If I want to take a shot of my building, I don't have to do this number. I stick it on a tripod or on a monopod if I have sufficient shutter speed. Stick it perfectly parallel to whatever it is that I'm shooting. Let's say a building. I'm going to raise it up to as far as I need to go. You'd be surprised. You think, well, 11 millimeters of this raising, which this is the max raise on this lens. You think, well, that's not too far. Oh, when you're looking through the viewfinder, it's raising it up a lot. Really, I hope this is a lens that Fujifilm makes in the future. Like I said, this is a Nikon f-mount lens. It's an AIS lens. And for a lens this old, this lens sits right at the top of the pile of like 3 or 4 or 5 lenses. It's just bleeding sharp. Just sharp, 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 sharp. Micro contrast is incredible. This is just an incredible, unknown, secret must-have lens. Like I said, Fujifilm has nothing like this. The next Nikon lens would be the 24 millimeter perspective control, which is a true tilt shift lens. Most of you don't need a shift feature, which was for depth of field control and special effects for miniaturization and other controls. Shifting a tilting lens, not just a shifting lens, but a tilting and shifting lens is more complicated. Not the shifting feature, but the actual tilting feature is. But this is strictly a shift-only lens. And this is incredibly useful. And I just gave you a 3-minute course on what the hell it is, why the hell it works, why the hell you would want it, and it's not complicated at all. Really, this entire lens, and simple, is sitting inside an articulating, completely 360-degree articulating barrel system which has an F mount at the back, which gives you complete control over eliminating all the freaking vertical lines that you point your camera up at and shoot, and they end up looking like this. Like I said, you can correct for that in Photoshop, but you're throwing away a lot of your shot. Capturing it in camera is so much superior to cropping out a lot of it and correcting it from this to this back to parallel in Photoshop and throwing away. You have to actually correct for that in Photoshop. You have to throw away a significant amount of your megapixels depending on how much your shot is framed. Think of all the outdoor shots of everything that is converging like this. You know how many people are like, oh my god, there's that beautiful picture of the lighthouse. I'm going to stand in the exact same spot, take a picture of the lighthouse. You've seen a beautiful picture of the lighthouse, but what you didn't realize is the professional that took a shot of that lighthouse was using a tilt-shift lens. In this case, you don't need tilt to do that. You only need shift. And then you go, oh, I'm standing in the same spot. The sun's setting over there. This is going to be a great shot. And then you go like this to capture the top of the lighthouse. And now the lighthouse looks like it's leaning over like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It is just not aesthetically nice. Like that perfectly straight lighthouse, for example, that you saw in the beautiful brochure. And it's like, why? My shot is beautiful, the sunset and the composition and the exposure. Why does my shot look like crap? Why can't I get my shot to look like that famous lighthouse shot? I stood in the same spot. I even did a better exposure. Sunsets in the back. It's because you didn't have a shift lens or a perspective control. As like I said, this is why Nikon calls them a PC lens, because not all PC lenses, they are now, all PC lenses are not tilt and shift. This is a shift only lens. But for what people do for interior and architectural photography, shifting is all they need. Like I said, in most cases you're probably never going to turn this lens unless you want to do a panorama. Because what you're going to do is you're going to want to keep your trees straight and parallel and your buildings and the adjacent buildings perfectly parallel. You're going to sit it on a tripod or a monopod, and then you're going to raise it up, take the shot, and that's it. That's as complicated as this lens is. This is not like, oh, rocket science, technical lens. It's like, what the hell is a rocket science? You just set your camera parallel to whatever it is you're shooting. You raise your front element and you take the shot, and then your buildings don't look like this. They look like you want them to look. And you don't have to screw around on Photoshop to fix that. And even if you do screw around on Photoshop to fix that, it's throwing away a significant portion of your image. So this is my secret must-own lens, because this lens is absolutely the tits. It is just absolutely insanely sharp by any estimation, but specifically so. All the more so considering the fact that it's an early 80s, late 70s AIS Nikkor. This lens is just bleeding sharp. Thanks so much for watching. Like I said, the average $300 to $400 on eBay, United States, but the Japanese love to sell this lens for between $600 and $700 because they know something that the Americans don't know. They know that this lens is the epic tatas. Thanks so much for watching. If you like these videos, you can click the link below, make a small donation, tell me to jump off a cliff, whatever makes you happy. But I take must-have recommended secret lens extremely seriously, because when I make a recommendation like that, there'll be a lot of people buy it off my recommendation. And I don't want anybody to be unhappy. Everything I said about this lens is flat out true. Yep. And so I take a video like this seriously. Even if you don't, I sure as hell do. Thank you. Bye.